Thank you, everybody, for being patient with us. I know we had some technical difficulties, but I'm really happy to have the opportunity to introduce Jon Taets from the National Association of Convenience Stores. He is the Director of Government Relations, and he will be leading us in a general discussion today on federal legislation and how it may impact you. Jon, during his spare time, no, not during his spare time, but with NACS, Jon represents NACS before Congress and the administration on issues such as labor, taxes, healthcare, and internet gaming. Sounds like a lot of fun. He joined NACS in March of 2014, and I think, Jon, I've known you for as long as you've been with NACS. And he spent over a decade on Capitol Hill prior to working for NACS. He worked in offices for Representatives Leonard Lance and Vito Fossella, as well as working on various political campaigns. For those of you that aren't familiar with NACS, NACS is a leading global trade association dedicated to advancing convenience and fuel retailing. Serves as a trusted advisor to over 1,500 retailer and 1,600 supplier members from more than 50 countries. A member-driven organization, NACS is led by a 32-member board of directors, which I'm proud to say I am a member of, and that's comprised of convenience retailers of all sizes from over the globe. So without further ado, I will let you take it away, Jon.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Appreciate that. And thanks you guys who've joined us today. I know we didn't get started a little late, so hopefully we'll get through it here and get you back on schedule a little bit if we can. As I said, one of our lobbyists down at NACS, working out of our office in Alexandria, although right now we're all working from home, but it is what it is. So what I want to do today for you guys is run through a little bit of what Congress has been up to for the past few months and what we expect them to kind of be getting at over the next few weeks at least. I'll give you an idea of where we're at. Like everything else in this world lately, the dominant factor at Congress and with the White House and Washington in general has been responding to the economic problems created by the coronavirus and the medical problems created by the coronavirus, obviously, as well. Since probably late February, Congress has passed 4 major pieces of legislation. There's a 5th on here because the House passed it, but the Senate has not. The first one was simply an appropriations bill, largely, that provided more funding for hospitals, for testing, for things like that, that started before people really, I think, understood how big of a problem coronavirus is going to be in this country. The second one, the major piece of legislation that came out in March, was the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, that FFCRA there. That's the one that, if you're familiar with it, created the paid time off mandates for smaller companies and provided some other funding for hospitals and things like that. They followed that up with the CARES Act. That is the one that created the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program loans, and the finally recently started, like last week before, the Main Street lending programs out of the Fed to try and get some liquidity into the market to businesses of all sizes, really, to try and keep the economy moving. Also, where you saw the individual payments to sorry, the federal payments to individuals, the stimulus payments that went out, that came out of that bill as well. Last one that was actually passed by both houses and became law was the additional PPP funding. There's a few $100 billion more that went into that program. A couple weeks ago, the House passed what's called their HEROES bill, and that is actually larger than the CARES Act in total expense. Like the CARES Act topped out at a little over $2 trillion. The full cost on the House version of this stimulus bill, called the HEROES Act, I believe tops in at over about $3 trillion. However, it is highly unlikely that that bill will become law as it was written, as it was passed by the House. I think there's one thing we may have forgot to hit. For the folks who are on, feel free to use the Q&A box. I think you can find at the bottom of your screens if you have any questions while I'm going through this. I'll see them pop up on another screen I got going here. So if I'm going through something too fast or you have questions on what I'm talking about, please feel free to shoot questions in there and we'll get through them. But again, that is kind of the state of play of what Congress has been focused on since, I'd say, late February, early March. They've started to get into some different things now, some different items, because they've gone through these and they're waiting on the Senate to act on a final stimulus bill. So they have, for the first time in I'm not sure how many decades, allowed for proxy voting on the House floor. That's something that's become a bit of a political football. It allows members who don't want to travel to Washington, D.C. to actually attend to vote in the House chamber the ability to designate one of their colleagues to cast votes for them. They have to tell specifically what, they want to vote yes, no, or present on every individual bill. That they're not giving a colleague the ability to decide for them, simply to really just push the buttons for them. So that is a new thing. And they are also conducting a lot of hearings and markups virtually, kind of like how we're doing this virtually. Congress is doing a lot of stuff virtually now as well. Some of it's working, some not so much. I was trying to track a Energy and Commerce hearing earlier today about the coronavirus response. They had a lot of members who were participating from home over Cisco WebEx is the service they use. And a lot of that was choppy and it was hard to understand what they were getting at to the witnesses in the room. So it's been hit or miss on how well that's working. So Congress is in a whole new space as well, like all the rest of us. But what I think is more important to get into is what we're hoping to see in the final stimulus bill. Over the next few weeks, the Senate is likely to be putting together their version of a final stimulus bill, which will be, just by definition of how the Senate works, a bit more of a bipartisan product than the House HEROES Act. House HEROES Act was written essentially by Speaker Pelosi in her office with her people. And it really amounts to a wish list for what the House Democrats would like to see in a bill, which is why it's so large and why it covers things that may not necessarily apply just to coronavirus response. The Senate, because of the minority rules in the Senate, the legislative filibuster that is the only one that still exists, has to have a bit of a more bipartisan agreement going on before they can get a bill to the floor to pass. So with that understanding, much like the CARES Act was finalized, much like the FFCRA was finalized, you'll see a lot of back and forth between Majority Leader McConnell, Minority Leader Schumer, Speaker Pelosi, and for most of the time out of the administration, it's been Secretary Mnuchin that has been doing most of the negotiations with Congress on what the president will be willing to sign. So that group's going to be banging together a package that I would expect to be a bit smaller than what the House passed in the CARES Act as far as total cost. There's a couple of key things that we're hoping to see in that package. Our top priority is what you see kind of on the screen here, if you can see that, which is getting some kind of liability protection for businesses, especially those who have remained open during this entire crisis, which pretty much covers all of you guys. As you know, there has been a lot of conflicting information coming out of different government agencies, whether it is the CDC, other parts of the federal government. In your case, if it's coming out of Harrisburg or other parts of other places, Pennsylvania, localities, whatever it is, has often been different, conflicting, confusing, whatever you want to call it. It's probably been all of the above at some point. The best example right now that we can use is this whole discussion on masks and their effectiveness and whether they should be mandated or not. I believe in talking to Lisa earlier that Pennsylvania's governor has been a little unclear on whether they're mandated inside there. I know here in Virginia, where I am, the governor has been pretty clear about them now being mandated whenever you're inside a building in a public place. But if you track back to early February, all we heard was that masks were not necessary and could almost be harmful because they're making you touch your face more and things like that. So a lot of conflicting information. And during this time, a lot of folks in our industry, and I'm sure many of you have done a lot of these same things, have done their best to protect consumers and customers while they were in your stores. Best examples we've seen, I know a lot of folks in the industry have shortened overall hours in order to provide time for more cleaning, more sterilizing of the building. They have added the plexiglass screens between the cashiers and the customers. Done your best to implement social distancing regulations, whether they were required or not, or just suggested. all of these things you guys have been trying to do the best you can to protect everyone in your stores, whether it's your customers or your employees themselves. Now we're in a situation where we've started to see some of these lawsuits pop up where people are coming in and claiming they got sick in a certain facility and then suing that facility for not doing enough to protect them. Now we've heard a lot of pushback from some folks on Capitol Hill, mostly from Democrats, that if we just got clear guidance, say from OSHA or from the CDC, on what we should do, that would provide a kind of safe harbor protection for a lot of you guys. The problem we have with that is, as you know better than us, that doesn't protect you from the lawsuit. Even if you are almost guaranteed that you're going to win the lawsuit, it's still going to cost money to defend yourself from something you shouldn't have to defend yourself from. So we're trying to get some kind of language included in this next stimulus package that provides some kind of at least limited liability from these kind of exposure lawsuits, people claiming they got sick in your store and coming back and suing you for it. Now, the liability issue itself has been a pretty significant political fight between the Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill. Majority Leader McConnell came out pretty early on in talks about this next package and said that some kind of liability protection was going to be his kind of red line in the sand. He would not pass a bill unless it had liability protections. Where at the same time, Speaker Pelosi said that she wouldn't do it at all. And there is no kind of liability protection in the House-passed CARES Act. Now, both of them have kind of come off that position a little bit, at least, where the Democrats want some increased funding for state and local governments to be included in this package. McConnell initially said that that wasn't necessary. He's moved off that a little bit, so maybe we can provide some money for state and local governments. And she's kind of come off a little bit, saying she's open to it, maybe a little too strong of a word for where the speaker is on this, but there's a little light, cracking that door there, I think, to what we may see on liability. So I think we have a decent chance of seeing something in there. I know larger groups like the Chamber of Commerce are trying to push this from all kinds of different angles, and they're looking at a lot of more kind of blanket liability protections, anything that would cover just about anything that you could get sued for in this time, and trying to make it a bigger, almost a larger tort reform discussion. Because of the dynamics of how Congress is right now, with Democrats in control of the House, and as I mentioned earlier, the minority rights in the Senate, we think it makes more sense to try and get something done on a little more kind of a limited basis that would still protect our industry and essential businesses and those reopening, who have done their best to try and protect, again, consumers and employees in the face of conflicting or missing guidance altogether, to make sure that you're not fighting off nuisance lawsuits for the next months or years going forward that could endanger your businesses because of the cost of those. So that's really our number one priority we're trying to get done in this package, and we think we got a pretty decent chance of seeing something in there. We continue to work with leadership on both sides, members on both sides. I know we've got some House Democrats that are more kind of conservative Democrats who are interested in doing something. So I think we may have a decent chance of getting something done there. Our next priority we're trying to get in is some kind of federal tax incentive that would reward frontline workers for continuing to work during this time. Again, as you guys, I'm sure, know better than us, also part of the CARES Act when Congress passed it was a increase in unemployment pay for those who lost their jobs due to the coronavirus. Now, they added $600 a week to whatever the state was already doing. So in many states, that put people at around probably $1,000 a week, if not more, on unemployment insurance, which is often a little more than they could probably make at most jobs. And if you're annualizing that out to $52,000 a year plus, that's more than a lot of people make in our industry or many other industries. And we've heard a lot of people having a hard time getting people to come back to work as you guys have had more business, been reopening, as other kinds of industries are reopening, they've seen the same thing where they're having a very difficult time getting folks to come back. So we've been working with a number of different members on Capitol Hill, trying to find ways to counterbalance that to a point. I don't think we're ever going to be able to match $600 a week, which you really break it down to 40-hour work week. It's $15 an hour, which I don't think is a coincidence, but that is what you're looking at. Now, I know a lot of your companies have provided already some kind of increase in pay for those during this time period. Some still are, some have stopped it by now, but we're trying to find something on top of that, coming directly from the federal government, preferably directly to the employees, that would allow them to get a little more money in their take-home pay for working as opposed to staying home. So probably our favorite proposal on that right now is, it's called the Aggie Chain Act, HR 4861, if anyone really wants to dive into it. Interesting enough, for this session, it is introduced by two Pennsylvania members, G.T. Thompson and Dwight Evans, introduced the bill a few weeks ago. Essentially, it would provide a exemption from federal income tax and from federal payroll tax for wages earned by frontline workers in our industry and others during the crisis, basically from February 15th until I think it was initially June 15th, but with the ability to push that on by up to 3 more months if the Secretary found that necessary. I believe it was capped at $25,000, I think, in exemption. If something like that were to be made into law, the nice thing there is employees could immediately change their withholdings, get money into their pockets immediately, which is our preference over other proposals that are out there that would funnel the money through the businesses. This is what we've heard from, at least at NACS level, from our board and from our legislative committee, that something directly to employees would be preferable. So that's why we focus on the Aggie Chain Act. On the House side, on the Senate side, Senator Joni Ernst is planning on introducing something similar. It would be a little wider in scope on who it covered. The Aggie Chain Act, kind of, as you may guess from the title, is kind of focused on agriculture. It's really the kind of food chain service from the farms all the way up through kind of point of sale, which includes grocery stores, our stores, restaurants, things like that. Anyone in that kind of supply chain would be covered by that. Senator Ernst's legislation that she's proposing on the Senate side, even though it's not introduced yet, would cover everybody covered under that Department of Homeland Security's SISA guidance for essential businesses, which covers a whole lot more people. So she's pushing that. She's been getting a little bit of pushback on the cost associated with that from some other folks in the Senate, but having some good discussions over there, and hopefully something will end up in that final package. There's a couple of proposals out there that we've looked at that we are supportive of, even if they're not the same as this one, being direct to consumers. One is introduced by Congressman Tom Reed, just north of you guys in New York. Some of you, I guess, who are in the northern part of Pennsylvania, who has a proposal that would essentially allow businesses to claim a tax credit to give their employees significant bonuses for the time period they've been working. It phases down starting at $30,000 up to $50,000, and then down to almost nothing if they make up to $99,000, I think it is. Again, a nice bonus, a nice added thing to give to employees. It's a little trickier because it requires the business owners or the business people who runs the business to apply for a federal tax credit, get the money, and then pass it down to their employees, which is why we prefer the direct to the employee tax withholding issue. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention there is something similar to that, or something in that same vein, included in the House HEROES Act. I think it's called their Hero Pay proposal, which would provide, I believe it's up to $10,000 to frontline workers in a very similar mechanism, where they would apply this fund through the federal government, the business would, and then pass it down to their employees based on how much they made. So I do think something on incentive payment to those who stayed on the job or are back on the job may very well be included in the final package. I just don't know exactly what form that will take. I would guess it's probably more likely the tax credit side, whether it is the direct to the employee or through your businesses, as opposed to the kind of direct funding mechanism we've seen before. But we'll have to see how that plays out. So I guess, I don't know, a few people have joined us since we started, so I just want to hit again. If you have any questions, you can use the Q&A box on the Zoom deal there. I'll see them on the screen here. Don't have any yet, but I know more folks have joined since then. So if you have any questions specifically on this, please let me know. Last thing I'll hit on the next stimulus package we expect to see is somewhat back and forth that is going on what to do about those $600 payments. It's called the pandemic unemployment insurance. The federal government is giving to states to pay on people who are on unemployment above their normal state amount. Initially, the Senate Republicans were pretty much saying they weren't going to do anything with that. They were going to let it die out and let it go at the end of July, I believe is what it is. That they've come off that to an extent, largely I think for political reasons, saying they're going to probably have to extend something, but how much it is kind of waiting to be seen. I would be very surprised if it's close to $600 again. I've heard $450 is a possibility. Also, there's some proposals to allow folks who come back to the workforce to keep some of the unemployment payments while they're back in order to balance that out a little bit. So I think we'll see something on that, something extending that. I don't know how far. Some proposals have extended it out through the end of the year. I don't think we're going to go that far with it, but that's what the HEROES Act does. The House version, it extends the $600 payments to the end of the year, which is something I think we probably have a significant problem with because of the difficulties it's creating getting people to come back to work. But again, we'll have to see what the final language is. We don't expect to see anything on this bill really until probably early to mid-July, definitely after July 4th. I don't think we'll see any specific details on what's going to be in this next package. A lot of time they got to talk about it. They're preoccupied right now on the Senate side and frankly the House side on police reform legislation. There's a lot of back and forth politically because of what everything else is going on with racial relations and all that in the country right now on what response the federal government should have to that. And there are, again, competing legislations between the House side and the Senate side on how Congress should deal with that. So that's taking up all the action in the room right now. So I do not expect anything on this to get done until mid-July, probably at the earliest. So stay tuned on that. We'll send us information as we know more on that one. So we move ahead to the next big deal that is coming up, and next thing that Congress is starting to work on that is not necessarily directly coronavirus related, even though you can make a singular argument that it is, in the sense that if Congress were to pass a significant infrastructure package, it would be a good way to get people back into the workforce and get people back to work. It's one of the ways traditionally that the federal government has been able to stimulate employment, really, is to create new infrastructure projects. So in that vein, that is what the House has been focused on for the last couple of weeks. The House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee held a markup on their package just last week. There's two other committees, the Energy and Commerce Committee and Ways and Means, that I know of that are working on different parts of that package in their committees this week. The problem we have with this is, I believe for the first time in the history of NACS, we have been forced to actually oppose the language in the current package. And I marked out a couple of reasons here why we've done that. As an association and directed by our board of directors, NACS is not opposed to electric vehicles. We think they are going to happen, and we want to make sure that our industry can compete on a level playing field in the charging structure that's going to need to take place. Obviously, the vast majority of Americans come to your stores now to fuel up their cars. It makes a lot of sense that they would continue to do so as you move to electric vehicles. So we want to make sure that the federal government is not putting barriers in the way of private industry and benefiting other somewhat monopoly organizations or governments themselves. And unfortunately, there's some language in the House Act that would move us in that direction. We were actually making pretty good progress on the EV language, particularly in terms of the rest area locations, until basically congressional Democrats out of California stepped in and got the speaker to kind of weigh in with Chairman DeFazio, who's from Oregon, who's the chairman of the Transportation Committee, saying they needed this certain language from another California Democrat in there that allowed for current rest areas to install these EV chargers, which essentially is creating a situation where private industry off the highway at exits, where a lot of you guys have spent a lot of time, money, and effort into getting these prime locations, are clearly disadvantaged by the on the highway stops. So having the federal government promote those on the highway stops that are essentially government backed anyway, because it's not exactly as open a process as it could be for who gets in there, creates an unlevel playing field. And that's the problem we have with that. Other parts of this language that we were, again, hoping to work on and hoping to tweak, and frankly, Chairman DeFazio was somewhat of a decent partner in this, or my colleague Paige Anderson does most of the stuff directly, but she and I are focused up though, we're having good conversations with his folks on what the language could look like that we could be okay with on different things that would incentivize different groups to get into this space. The one we have a real problem with is the fact that the current language incentivizes investor-owned utilities to build EV charging. We don't think that utilities should be blocked out of this, but they should use their same kind of after-tax P&L dollars that you guys would have to install electric vehicle charging stations. And there's some grant programs included in the House T&I version that would essentially give them direct grants, essentially double dipping between grants and the somewhat monopoly they already have on the ratepayer funds that they get to do this. And that is the problem we have with it, where it creates an unlevel playing field where they have that kind of monopoly ratepayer funds to use. We do not. So as long as they're competing on the same level playing field using P&L funds, we're okay with that. But it's when you kind of level up, when you unlevel that playing field is where we have a problem. So we're going to watch this as it continues to move. We are actually a little more optimistic about the energy and commerce version. There's a lot of language in there around EVs and around grants and charging that we're certainly more happy with, at least from what was released recently and what they're going to be marking up this week. That committee is chaired by Congressman Frank Pallone from your neighboring state of New Jersey, who is not usually the biggest friend of our industry, but in this case, we were feeling a little good about where energy and commerce has been. So hopefully that'll stay as they embark up the bill this week. You're likely to see this bill, once all the committees are done with it, on the floor of the House probably next week. It's probably not, overall, not going to look like a great bill. There's going to be a lot of kind of Green New Deal type stuff, a lot of renewable energy type stuff in this package. Very little of that is likely to end up surviving in a hopefully eventual House Senate conference that may happen. That would not likely happen until probably September, really, because the House is going to be focused on, or the Senate is going to be focused on the new stimulus package they're going to have to do through mid-July, and then they are still going to take an August recess because it's an election year, so they all have to spend time campaigning and not, in Washington or doing virtual hearings and meetings. And then they'll come back in September, and that is when you may see some serious movement on infrastructure done on the Senate side, which will hopefully lead to something final, back pass to the House as well, or a conference committee of some kind, and then get into the White House. If they're going to do it, that's probably the timing they're going to look at. Excuse me one second. Now, one other issue that I know is of significant interest to our industry that is not really on the congressional radar right now because of everything else going on with coronavirus and infrastructure and police reform and everything else, is the future of CBD. We all know that the recent Farm Bill actually legalized hemp-derived CBD and allowed that to come onto the market. However, there remains a significant hindrance to actually legally selling it across the country because the Food and Drug Administration has authority over anything that is ingestible or makes any kind of a significant health claim. So technically, under FDA regulations, the only thing that you can really legally sell right now are kind of topical creams that really don't make any kind of a health claim benefit. You technically shouldn't be selling anything that is ingestible, whether it's gummies or tinctures or anything like that. I know many people are, and many states are allowing it to happen. The federal government essentially is allowing it to happen. But we would like to see some kind of actual federal regulation in this space that allows that to continue in a safe and properly regulated manner. I spent a lot of time trying to deregulate things, but in this case, I think it is something that we want to see something that, so people know for sure what they're getting in these products. I know there's been a lot of discussion back and forth on what is actually in some of these, whether they have the same level of CBD they claim they do or do not. So we're working with a number of different business organizations, trade associations here in DC to try and get the FDA to do something in this space that would provide some kind of benefit and provide some clarity to what we're trying to do here. I think the most likely scenario is they will regulate some of these products more loosely, the same way they do supplements right now, which is somewhat hands-off. There's some regulation making sure that, you know, what you say is in them. But these are the things you see on the shelves that often say that, you know, these statements are not regulated or have not been verified by the FDA or something like that. That's probably where they'll start to get some of the stuff on the market and help move things along so that retailers like yourselves or others, if you want to, will be able to legally sell more of this stuff, whether it be the gummies, tinctures, things like that, whatever you may look at. Others are trying to focus on enforcement. There's a group out there that we've been in touch with, that we're working with, that is trying to get more money to the FDA to enforce their current rules to make sure that what's out there is not dangerous. I think enforcement is necessary, but I do think that some kind of actual regulation to allowing different entries of the market, safe entries of the market, should really happen first and get that done, get something out there. Because in those states that have, whether they've legalized recreational marijuana altogether, or they have just given the go-ahead on CBD products, we know this stuff is flying off the shelves. People are buying it, people love it. We had for the first time ever last year at our trade show, we had a CBD pavilion section directed just about CBD products that was hugely popular. We have, I think, doubled the square footage of that for the show for this coming year, or this year in October, which we're still planning on hosting, by the way, so please come to Las Vegas. So it's out there, it's popular. We need to make sure that what people are getting is actually what they think they're getting. I think the next step for the FDA, and whether this is pushed by Congress or not, or just pushed by the FDA, is allowing for these ingestible products to come onto the market and to be properly regulated, safe and legal, whether that be pills, gummies, drinks, things like that. So I think that's a little bit kind of next step as far as what the FDA, I think, is comfortable doing. So that somewhat wraps up what I had to talk about, and I don't see any questions in the Q&A panel, so I don't know if Lisa or Jennifer or anybody else has any questions that they've seen that they'd like to get into, or if there's something else anyone would like me to address or talk about that I didn't cover yet. So I guess the floor is open.
I don't have any questions personally, but I wanted to thank you again for being patient with the technical difficulties. I feel terrible about that.
Not a problem.
Thank you so much.
Does anyone have any questions? We have to give them at least one difficult question. Just one.
We just never let things be easy for me, so let's go.
Anyone?
All right, everyone's pretty quiet.
Okay.
Right.
Well, my email address and phone number are on this last slide here, so if anyone has any questions that they think of later, give me a call, shoot me an email. I will be around.
Thanks, John.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you to NACS for everything that you guys are doing for our industry. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have our back. All right. Thank you.